that's what makes it interesting to me, because then it's not about who is right and who is wrong, and more who is reasonably closer to being right due to having the better arguments.
Hello and welcome to the Mystery Gamedev Podcast, where we cross-examine the developers of mystery-themed video games and investigate the skills it takes to make one yourself. Today's guest is Kigyo, the creator of the mini-viral mystery visual novel Locked, and several other games. His most notable project is the upcoming anti-death game visual novel called Artificial Selection. It has a very lengthy demo currently available on Steam, and I actually played through all of it, so I've got a lot of questions once we get to that part of the conversation. But for now, I just want to start off by asking, Kigyo, how have you been?
Well, I'm just surprised you played the whole demo. Like,
Oh,
I
really?
I wasn't expecting that, but
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
honored.
it was a really good demo, honestly. It had me hooked pretty early from the beginning, and then I was very curious about the outcome of what would happen. So, um, I'll definitely talk more about that when we talk about artificial selection. But I want to start off by talking about Locked because probably a lot of people have gotten to know you through Locked because of its
Yeah.
popularity. So I want to start off with that. So could you please briefly explain the premise of the game Locked and why people should go and play it if they haven't yet?
Well, basically, I think Locked was it started as an idea. I just wrote down as I did like philosophy homework, since I studied philosophy, and then one seminar was about John Locke. And then there was this one passage where I was like, damn, that's actually a really good setup for like a novel. And then in my next semester break, I then actually went and made a novel about it. So that's basically how it came to be. And I kind of abstracted it a lot. Like the setup, his line was just about imagine you are locked in a room with a stranger that you really enjoy talking to, yada yada. And then I went and turned the stranger into a pretty anime girl. So I did take some creative liberties there, but overall, I think it follows the theme pretty well.
Interesting. So you're saying that the philosophy homework that you were working on had the premise of the girl in the room in it?
Well, it's actually, I think it's probably a man in the room
Oh,
when Locke wrote it, because everyone in philosophy back then was a man. But
right.
um, yeah, it was basically just the homework was read this passage and then write a short little paper about it. But I didn't actually use the paper for the visual novel. So yeah, it was the passage itself was what made a pretty cool setup there.
So I guess you can thank your philosophy teacher for that.
Yeah, for real, like indirectly, since I think it's now sitting at 960 reviews
Yeah, yeah.
and like over 100,000 players. So I really didn't expect it to reach that many people, but I'm really happy about that.
And 94% positive. That's a really important factor too, is that not only are there a lot of
Yeah.
people playing, but that they love it. So,
At some point, it was actually at like 95% positive, and then Steam gives you the overwhelmingly positive text, but now it fell down to 94. So I need more positive reviews to get it back up there.
well, you know what to do, guys. Go play it and review it. No.
Right. That's your reason to play it, just for that.
So go ahead and tell us the story of how it got so popular in the first place, because it's a very interesting one.
Yeah, it is fun because I think I woke up one day, like 3 days after I released it, for a really small game jam. It was like called My First Game Jam, so it's mostly for people that either are making their first game or their first game trying a new thing that they haven't had experience with. And for me, the new thing was writing a more like conceptual visual novel that wasn't very character driven. So the writing is also very different from my usual style. So, but I really enjoyed trying something new. And then, yeah, after 3 days after publishing it, I suddenly saw that the views just exploded. Like it went from maybe 50 to 1,000, and I was scared immediately. And then I saw all the traffic was coming from YouTube. And that's when I found out that a popular streamer, Manly Badass Hero, who frequently covers indie horror-ish games, just happened to find it and played it and then made a video about it. And I think ever since then, that really got the ball rolling and new people keep coming in. And then after that, when I published it on Steam, it again, I was so lucky, like twice in a row with the same game, which is crazy. It also got featured on the wait, Opera GX browser, I think. Like they have this homepage where they recommend games, and apparently was featured there for like a week. And that's also where a ton of people came in. So
Wow.
I and it's like zero marketing on my part. It just happened.
Do you understand why Opera featured your game?
I think they just have a widget where I think it must be curated by humans because it was the same for a lot of people and didn't seem to be an algorithm, but I'm honestly not sure at that point. And I guess it was just a very positively rated free game on Steam early on, and then it just snowballed from there.
That's interesting. I mean, I didn't even realize that that was a thing that they did. So,
Yeah, neither did I until I heard it in the reviews. Yeah, that was crazy.
so you said you made it for something called My First Game Jam or something like that. Was this actually your first game that you made?
No, actually, it was like my fourth game,
Oh, okay.
or yeah, it wasn't technically my first game. It was just my first game trying a specific genre, and also the point and click gameplay with the side scrolling was also a completely new thing that I made from scratch. And it's also a game jam that only lasts 14 days. So
Hmm.
that's why the game is also extremely short, since I didn't have that much time for the writing at all.
So would artificial selection be your first game, or would it be something totally different?
It's it's both my first game and not even a game yet. So since yeah, I started working on it the first, so it was in that sense my first game, but since I am still currently working on it and it's not complete yet, uh I guess a Deep Sea Valentine, which is completely different, would be my first.
Okay, okay, interesting. Yeah, and it was also interesting. I didn't realize this looking back, preparing for this conversation. The video by Manly Badass Hero was in 2021,
Yeah.
but the Steam page for Locked was only put up in 2023. So it's really even more impressive, actually. There's probably way more people that have played it than it looks like, just because there's such
Yeah.
a long period of time between the two stores, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I honestly I first just there was this spike after the Manly Badass Hero video where the itch downloads were kind of exploding, and then it kind of died down again. And after that, I almost got like hate comments about people being mad about the game's message,
Uh-huh.
which I kind of understand. It's a very controversial game in a way. But after that, I kind of didn't want to have anything to do with Locked anymore. So it took me over 1 year or maybe even two to then put it on Steam as well. And since then, I felt ready to face the same backlash again. And then it again went viral. So it's kind of a two-edged sword, but I'm still really happy about the game.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because I was considering asking a question about some of the reviews I was looking at, although they were on Steam instead. Uh,
Yeah.
it's interesting. Some people have described the game as quote pretentious, which I guess comes with the territory of a philosophy game. Uh,
Definitely.
Painfully ignorant, nihilistic to an extreme, and also literally one of the worst experiences I've ever had. So I, I think that last one has to be an exaggeration. Um, Clearly, the overwhelming majority of people disagree with that. I think it's an awesome game myself. Um, but yeah, I mean, how do you sort of prepare to handle that kind of criticism? Especially, like you said, it might have a controversial message. So, um, how do you sort of deal with that when you see things like that?
Yeah, so actually I can explain that on two different cases because the
Okay.
first time I got these reviews that was on itch, uh I think my first response was just to distance myself from what I created,
Hmm.
and I kind of just pretended that, oh, no, I actually didn't mean anything in the game, and it was just a 2 week project, so it didn't mean anything anyway.
Hmm.
And that's kind of how I dealt with it. But like in hindsight, it's still I stand behind what I made, and I really was just coping there. But yeah, the second time around, I guess it's really important for everyone to realize that what you make might not be for everyone, and that's fine. And some people will just be really mean about it, and you can't really escape that, but the best you can do is just focus on the positive reviews and how many people do resonate with it and actually like it. Because yeah, it's really not either, it's not avoidable, and it's also not productive to focus on like mean-spirited comments. Of course, the criticism is still valuable, and I do take that to heart, but yeah, just people saying it's the worst thing they ever played and it ruined their day or something, that doesn't really help anyone. So that you can just ignore.
I definitely agree, and it's especially ironic that this game would get that kind of feedback because I mean it's a free game first off, so it's not like they lost any money by playing it, right? And
Yeah.
it's only like maybe 10 or 20 minutes long at most, so
Yeah.
you
Right.
know,
You don't waste time either. It's
right?
really
It's a very efficient game, yeah. So I don't know what they're talking about, but yeah, I played it last year. I personally enjoyed it a lot. Now, I did notice when I played it, and I think you might have answered this in private, but I just want to sort of make this clear. Um,
Mhm.
the first thing I noticed, looking at the game's screen, by the way, it's very efficient that, you basically made a whole game that is just one screen long. It's not anything more or less than that. I thought that was a great way to like really make a game quickly. Um, but the one screen that it has is, the girl sitting in the room. It really looks reminiscent of uh, a certain part of Doki Doki Literature Club. Was that intentional or was that not intentional?
Honestly, I like didn't deliberately take inspiration from that, but since I did play Doki Doki before I made that game, I can't exclude that I was subconsciously inspired by it, but it also wasn't supposed to be a reference either. I guess there's just something about anime girl sitting and staring intently directly at you that's a bit ominous.
Yeah. Uh, I thought about this actually when preparing the questions, but I wonder if that actually maybe helped the game like get more popular because unintentionally, where maybe subconsciously the people playing it are looking like, oh, that looks like you know Doki
Yeah,
Doki. I
yeah.
don't know.
There are a lot of comparisons, and I definitely understand them, but I still feel like there are also enough differences to make them make it not seem like I'm just directly ripping off Doki Doki either. I hope, at least.
The other thing that's interesting about Locked is that it's a very short game. Like I said, it's only maybe 10 or 20 minutes depending on your reading speed. Do you think the length of the game helped contribute to its success as opposed to maybe if you had made it longer?
I definitely think so because I think because it's so fast, and also there's no save feature, you're kind of forced to play it all and finish it in one sitting. And it's easily doable because it's so short. And I think also because, yeah, I'm not going to spoil or anything, but just because the kind of ending is so surprising, that also then motivates people to immediately go down and write a comment or a review. And that happens to be very good for the algorithm. So
Hmm.
I think, like, I didn't plan it. I didn't go into it like this will boost the algorithm, but that's just what it did. And it was very efficient at that.
Yeah, so on the topic of the algorithm, the game's description actually says an algorithm decided to show you this. And I think that probably helped pique some curiosity for some people. I know, like, if I'm looking at that, I would probably be curious about why, something about this game has to matter for it to say that, because we all know that algorithms curate the content that we see on these websites. Or maybe it just curates what we think we want to see. And it's designed to help us stay engaged on these platforms. And I don't know if you've ever seen like I watch a lot of YouTube videos, and I know that some people like intentionally title their YouTube videos like uh if the algorithm shows you this, you need to click this right now or something. I don't know if you've ever seen those.
Yeah, I've had it with music a lot, like just music playlists. I like that.
Did you sort of base the description for Locked based off of that, or what was your intent behind that? Was it trying to channel that kind of energy and like get people to click, or was it more thematic about the theme of the game?
I'd say honestly, the main reason was that because the game is so short, there's barely anything I can say in the description without like giving away part of the experience. So I just made it as vague as humanly possible, and then also made it clickbaity in a way that tied into the game's themes, and that's just how it ended up. But yeah, definitely clickbait on purpose a little bit.
Do you think, whether intentionally or unintentionally, maybe that description actually sort of helped filter the right people to that kind of game? Because those might be the kind of people who think that the algorithm really did show them that game for a reason, and maybe it takes away some of their free will. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably like a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point.
so the game features a quote about free will from John Locke. It says, "For a man may prefer what he can do to what he cannot do, the state he is in to its absence or change, though necessity has made it in itself unalterable." So, without spoiling anything that you don't want to spoil, can you sort of explain the significance of this quote, if that's at all possible, without spoiling anything? Or maybe what John Locke was trying to say?
Yeah, so in John Locke's defense, that sentence was actually even longer, and I just took the second half of it to make it a little bit more concise. And
Hmm.
I think that's why the what the it is referring to gets a little bit muddier. But I think what he's trying to say is that basically, um, you you may think you are free because you can do what you want to do, but you cannot control what you want to do. Or at least that's how I understood it. And basically, that's kind of what Locked is also about. So, but of course, there's many different interpretations as well.
You said that this was sort of inspired from your philosophy class. Uh, was it just sort of a random philosophy class that you had to take? Because I know I had to take one of those myself, but or was it? Do you have sort of a passion for philosophy in general?
Oh, fun fact, I did actually major in philosophy, so that wasn't a coincidence.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
But yeah, that was just a random elective I took because I do remember, or I did remember Locke from other classes, and I always thought his takes were pretty nice. So then I was interested in just having a full seminar about him. And yeah, I didn't regret
Interesting. Do you think because that was such a random elective, do you think you had any free will in
it.
making the game or not?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, yeah, I guess since I have to kind of stand with determinism on this one, I guess I didn't have any choice, and it was always meant to happen this way. But
Yeah, I find that whole conversation very interesting about free will and determinism. I'm not a philosophy major. I'm a computer science major, but I think about these things a lot, and so it'll be very interesting to talk about them. Obviously you've decided to major in philosophy. So what got you interested in it in the first place?
that's also a very good question. I think it's probably a mix between um one of my teachers that I really liked back in high school because he was both a German teacher and also a philosophy teacher. And he kind of infused the German classes with philosophy. And then in my final year of high school, I also took his philosophy class. And then that really got me on board because we just watched The Matrix in class and then discussed its themes. And it was just the most fun I've had in school in forever. And yeah, at that point, I was basically already sold on philosophy. And I guess also um, maybe watching the Hunger Games also
Interesting.
really got me into philosophy because it just raises some really cool dilemmas and political themes as well.
Hmm.
So that kind of was also in the back burner a little.
Well, have you been inspired by the Hunger Games? And I mean, clearly artificial selection is a sort of a death game kind of game, right? So maybe there's some influence there.
Yeah, I think especially in terms of the world building, like maybe not so much the politics, but just in the value of setting up an entire universe and with its own laws and rules and societies rather than being very close to what we currently have and know. Since I feel like a lot of other death games are either in a almost a bit of a goofy alternate universe where it's far removed from reality, or it's just it doesn't put any emphasis on the world building at all, and it's just assumed it's more or less the same world that we live in. So I really like that.
Yeah, and I actually I can see that from having played the demo, because clearly between locked and artificial selection, there's a lot of different things that you sort of put into these games that have clear philosophical overtones and bring up different ethical dilemmas and moral situations. And it's clear that you're passionate about this and you're very well read on it and studied on it. So where does your passion for philosophy come from? Why do you like it so much?
Oh, that's also a fun question. I think it's kind of just the general feeling of thinking about something that you never questioned before. Because, yeah, sure, at some point you'll have heard all the crazy theories out there, but somehow there's still always something new that some philosopher out there has questioned, like colors or if we are even real. Like, they question everything. And I do just find that very fun because you can just think about it and have a thousand of different opinions about it and discuss them. And at the same time, or unless you're going into ethics, then it's a little more dangerous again. But if it's just about theoretical philosophy, most of the time people won't get like personally hurt if you have a different opinion. So you can pretty much debate freely without like making anyone sad in essence. So I do like that because you can really just go all out with arguing about something that really does not matter and it's just fun.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I feel the same way. I love debating on just about any topic, really, and trying to understand how things work. And I sort of think about it as, trying to understand. Some people, I guess, describe this as, ontological mystery, where
Yeah.
it's like trying to figure out, who am I and where am I and why am I here, kind of thing. All the ancient philosophers, I
Yeah.
guess, probably started asking themselves. And normally these are actually topics that people don't really want to debate because they get so heated over it. Um,
Yeah,
right? Uh, Politics and religion, those are sort of the big questions, but at the same time, it's like they're very, very deeply connected to philosophy and sort of the way of thinking um, that philosophy tries to make you to get you to understand how to think rather than just like what to think.
yeah. So I
Um,
do want to correct that people definitely do get heated about theoretical philosophy, but I just feel like it's it's still, even if you argue really hard, at the end of the day, there's rarely any hard feelings, if that makes sense.
which is probably very hard to come by in today's society. I feel
And I
like.
guess that's part of the appeal, because you can just argue about something that's at the end of the day a little bit silly. What's also fun is just arguing about things that aren't, like, can't be verified, because it's really impossible to determine a winner when neither side actually fully knows what is true. So all you can really do is try to bring the best arguments, but at the end of the day, there's really no way to prove who is right. And that's what makes it interesting to me, because then it's not about who is right and who is wrong, and more who is reasonably closer to being right due to having the better arguments. But at the end of the day, you really don't know.
When you were in philosophy school or whatever you want to call it, uh, did you ever like how often did you get into like a debate with other philosopher type people or philosophers? Did you ever have your mind actually changed on a topic?
That's also a fun one. I just considered that pretty recently. But yeah, so most of the classes are just some professor standing in the front and just explaining what this one guy said, and then you just know, like, in which period of time which theories were the most popular. But usually in seminars, then you're actually encouraged to debate among yourselves. And I wouldn't call it like a debate, as in there's this uh, rapid back and forth between two people that are just trying to uh, own each other. But it's definitely more moderated by the teacher, and he also tries to, like, let everyone have a say and just place their thoughts in the circle. But yeah, I'm trying to think of an instance where I had my mind changed, and it probably was about some bioethics class, because I used to have a really, really, really pro, how we call it, just pro progress mindset, that any
Hmm.
technological advancement is automatically good because you can develop it into something more positive, even if the initial development isn't inherently good. But I think then some people just made the argument that certain developments aren't worth the innovation, and we should just, like, be happy with what we have now and not, like, screw things up just for the sake of innovating them. And I found that pretty interesting. And when I first heard that, it kind of blew my mind. So, yeah.
Okay, that's a very good answer. I like that one. Because I've actually considered that myself from a number of different areas. I can also sense that in artificial selection a little bit. I got that feeling with one of the characters there too, um, and some of the topics that are discussed. But uh, when I was in university, I took your typical ethics class. But outside of that, I mean that sort of went over all the basics, like the trolley problem and everything.
Mhm.
But the other time I remember being involved in sort of an ethical discussion was when I took an AI class,
Oh, yeah.
and yeah, and the big question that I remember was that I thought was interesting was if you're programming a self-driving car, um, do you program the AI so that if there's a pedestrian in the middle of the road, do you make the car swerve to avoid hitting the pedestrian at the cost of killing the passenger, or do you just let it hit the pedestrian and save the passenger? I thought that was an interesting question,
Yeah.
and I still don't really, I mean, I guess you should probably prioritize. Like, it's hard, right? Because it's like, well, if you paid for the car, you should probably prioritize the passenger's life,
Yeah.
um, as like a product, right? But you also don't want to just go around hitting pedestrians. So, I don't know. What do you think about that? If you have
Yeah,
an
I
answer.
think that's a really good one. And I do think probably just money will do the talking, and they will reason that no one would want to buy the car if the car will not prioritize their own safety. So,
Right.
from the company's perspective, I think I know what their answer is. But yeah, it's definitely a very gray area. I guess if the car could somehow calculate if the pedestrian is in the wrong for being in the street at that moment, or if the
Just
driver
hit him.
is in the wrong, like,
uh,
but that's even harder. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, hopefully in like 90% of cases, you don't need, like, it doesn't need to come down to killing one or the other,
Yeah.
right? Hopefully they could both be safe. But in the 10% or maybe 1% of cases where you have to sacrifice somebody, which one is it going to be? Um, so I always thought that was an interesting question.
Yeah.
Um, and now, of course, now AI means something very different. We never had, we discussed AI ethics a lot, but we never discussed the ethics of copyright infringement, right? So that was a totally
Yeah,
different
because that's the humans doing it though. It's not the AI.
thing. But yeah, it's very interesting to think of all the different technological advancements that really have been happening at a pretty rapid pace, actually, in the past few years.
Yeah.
It does make you kind of wonder if we're going too fast. Do you believe in like a singularity moment?
That's I think that was also one of my big changes in opinion. I used to be like a total geek for AI, and I was like convinced all of our brains are going to be digitalized and we'll all be immortal at some point. But then I kind of just went in the complete opposite direction and thought uh, like the biological process in our brain can't just be replicated with electronic signals. And so I think there's still something missing for AI to actually be smarter than humans, and it's not just more computational power.
It needs a heart or a soul,
A
maybe.
soul.
Yeah. So I guess speaking of artificial intelligence, maybe we could talk about artificial selection.
Yeah, sure.
Does that have any what okay, tell me about the name actually, artificial selection. The name artificial selection actually does mean something, but I don't know what it really means. So can you explain for the audience what the phrase means?
Definitely. So you probably know natural selection, which is like the Darwin system ish. So artificial selection is when humans actually interfere and selectively breed something based on desired characteristics for humans. So it's not like necessarily meant to be optimized for surviving in the wild, but just for example, chickens that are extraordinarily fat. So they have more meat, for example, even though they would probably not survive in the wild because they would be not like agile enough to run away. For humans, this is a desirable trait, so that would be artificial selection.
Let's take a step back and explain sort of what kind of game artificial selection is, and then sort of let us know how the title factors into that.
Sure. So artificial selection is a kind of death game or an anti-death game about 14 convicted criminals being stuck in a rehabilitation facility. And the title plays a part in the world building where this is so convoluted now. Um, they live in a world where any crime gets punished with the death penalty because they think just acting outside of society's idea of goodness makes you a bad person, and therefore you should not be allowed to exist. So the title artificial selection plays into this idea that humans are themselves being artificially selected.
So why do you refer to it as an anti-death game? What makes it the opposite of your normal death game then?
Right. It's because the the criminals already did the bad thing, and that's why they're in there. But their job is actually to just befriend each other, and specifically to not, for example, kill each other like in other death games. So it is kind of uh, a kind of marketing move to call it an anti-death game because it's
Mhm.
really not the first time this setup has been done of the people actually don't have to kill each other. But yeah, I still like to call it that because it's more focused on them becoming friends than them killing each other. But spoilers, they do still kill each other.
No, I mean, I think that's a good marketing strategy. I think a lot of developers should sort of have something like that in mind, like a really quick, 2 or 3 word way to describe their game. And I think that summarizes it really well, actually. So the setting of the game, you kind of alluded to the fact that it takes place in the 22nd century. There's a bit of a sci-fi element to the game that wasn't. I don't think it was immediately obvious until I started playing that there was like a bit of a, you know, n- takes place in the near future. So there's a
Yeah,
little bit of a. It's not totally like our society is today, but it seems like it reasonably could be what our society is like 100 years from now.
yeah.
I know you already mentioned one difference. Are there any other big like differences sort of between uh, our modern environment and the setting that the story takes place in?
I think I I can actually kind of downplay the differences, I guess, because
Okay.
I there, I'm sure there's a lot of other stories that call themselves sci-fi that then automatically take everything into space or like other planets. And
Hmm.
I guess I just wanted to provide a different alternative to that. And not that there's anything wrong with space science fiction, but I just thought probably 100 years isn't quite enough time. So I figured in 100 years, a lot of things might be automated or exactly like AI will be even further developed than it is now. And it's also hinted at with like robot employees being everywhere or other new technologies for new needs that people have. So that is there. But other than that, yeah, it is pretty much like today's society.
Hmm. So it's just a little bit more technology and mostly still modern enough to not really notice, right? That like
Yeah.
and there's also a lot of I found this to be really interesting that there's a lot of I would say surface level religious concepts because the main premise of the game is that every character has committed a crime, but they're also referred to as sinners that have committed sins, and they get paired up with what they call their sin mates, which are all referenced based on the seven deadly sins. So the main character. Oh, by the way, I forgot to ask this. How do you pronounce the main character's name? Uh,
Ah, his name is Seva.
Seva. Okay, they all have very interesting names.
Yeah. I guess that's also one of the main differences
Yeah,
that culture has developed to have new common names.
yeah, yeah. So Seva is paired with Ephra, and they're both the Wrath sin mates, so they're associated with the deadly sin of Wrath, and that I guess presumably has some connection to the crime they committed, although Seva cannot seem to remember his crime, which is sort of the driving force behind most of the conflict, I think. Uh, and the way to supposedly win the game is through some kind of repentance and forgiveness. Uh, so I found that religious theme to be pretty interesting, and that philosophy is like very closely tied to religion, as I kind of mentioned earlier. So, and I think that sort of comes into play with the moral aspect of it because a lot of people might argue that you can't be moral without religion, or something to that effect, and that a lot of morality and religion is connected in some way. Um, and of course, in the context of the game, you've got all of these different sinners who are trying to redeem themselves, uh, through the death game or the anti-death game. So it's an interesting concept to have that in a sci-fi setting, I think.
Yeah, I I guess it was almost kind of a coincidence that that happened. Like I just at some point in time just was really fascinated with the seven deadly sins. And actually that is how I came up with all the characters, is that I just uh took the sin and then came up with two characters for each sin. And then I guess I just carried that through to the game itself, even though I honestly never really thought about the religious connotations, which sounds really stupid right now. But yeah,
Really? I mean, it's the way the way I wrote the sentence down. Like I wrote that as like a question, but it's like it's kind of true, right? I mean,
yeah,
uh, it's a very good metaphor.
yeah,
So intentional or not. Um,
yeah. No, I mean the punishment and redemption part is definitely a core theme, so it does tie into that for sure. Yeah.
are there any significant meanings to the characters' names, or is there some sort of hidden meaning? Like if you, I kind of thought maybe they're like anagrams for something, or I don't know. They're very random seeming, and they're not like normal names that you would find today for the most part. I don't think. Um, so how did you come up with those?
That's also a fun one because I just originally I gave all of them Latin names, which also again I
Mm-hmm.
guess kind of ties into the seven deadly sins thingy,
Mm-hmm.
since I think up until recently the Catholic Church's original official language was still Latin. So I came up with Latin names that were just Latin words describing certain character traits. And then I figured out, okay, it's really boring if everyone's name ends with us or ah. So I kind of had to mix it up a bit and just threw them into a word mash upper. So
Mm.
until it ended up sounding like a feasible name. I guess I didn't succeed in every case, but more or less that's what I ended up with. And there is one, or I guess there are two exceptions to that because there are the two host characters, Venagloria and Tristicia,
Mm-hmm.
and their names are actually kind of the forgotten deadly sins
Mm.
because in one interpretation there used to be more. So uh, if you're familiar, there's the sin of pride, but
Mm-hmm.
that one scholar also distinguished vainglory as a separate sin. So that's vanagloria.
Mm.
And the same is with sloth, which I guess is Arcadia or something. And there was also a separate but closely associated sin, sadness, which is Tristitia. So I guess those are kind of the Easter egg sins that are also represented.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that actually, so that's awesome. Um,
Yeah, I guess it's not canonical anymore, so there is no reason to know that, but I thought it was fun.
yeah.
And yeah,
Um,
so the other exception, which I do still want to bring up, is a Kaiden's name, which is just a mix between the names Kyle and Dan. So yeah, that's his name.
two very ordinary names mixed in with all the other ones. That's pretty funny. Do most people know how to pronounce the names, or do you have to correct them all the time?
Oh no, yeah, no, everyone pronounces them differently, and I honestly also don't I'm also not living 100 years in the future, so I don't know how they pronounce it either. Yeah. No, I guess I did build in the self-voicing of Renpai to pronounce them how I think they should be pronounced
Oh, okay.
with like phonetic workarounds, but honestly, I'm not too finicky about pronouncing them correctly.
Okay.
But yeah, everyone struggles with it. I did learn one thing from it is that in my next game, I'm gonna try to pick more normal names because it definitely it 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 does make the characters harder to be, or it makes the game less streamable, I think,
Yeah.
from like a purely uh developer marketing perspective. I guess having easily pronounceable character names does help. But yeah, that's just the general takeaway.
One thing that you could do um, is to sort of just have a way in game to show the pronunciation of them. I mean, I think Umineko did that with
Uh,
all the Japanese characters were they had Western names, right? So, but they had them written in kanji, but the kanji didn't pronounce the way that they were supposed to. So
uh, yeah,
Ryukishi actually wrote like how to say the names. So you could do it that way too, where it's just if you wanted to to do it that way.
I guess. Yeah, then the problem is, do you write it like in the way only English speakers would understand it, or a more official phonetic language, which most people might not actually understand? Or yeah, it's also hard.
Talking about the game itself, you've actually put a lot of effort into various accommodations for people who play the game. I noticed that right off the bat. Um,
Ah,
the very first thing that pops up is like a screen that asks what kind of content you want to see. Um,
mhm.
I'm the kind of person who wants everything, so I didn't check any of those boxes. But um, some people might appreciate that. So
Yeah, definitely. I actually, I mainly came up with that because I do have a few younger teenagers in my server, and whenever they played the update, I would just feel bad if there was like a really gory scene or something. So I just wanted to safeguard them and just give them a good experience with the game without traumatizing anyone. So
right.
that's that's why I put that in there. And also because I know like not everyone is interested in romance in a mystery game, so
Hmm.
I also put that as more optional since it's not really the core theme of the game either.
That is an interesting point that there is romance in the game. Not every mystery game has that, as you said, and is the structure of the game. So just so people understand who are listening,
Mhm.
the structure of the game is set into 14 different routes, one presumably for each character um,
Yeah.
that you can romance. As far as the game's current progress, how far along is it into uh, the development of those routes?
I'm currently only working on the third route, so I still have a lot ahead of me. But I guess the more I also work out the common routes of different branching spots, it's gonna get faster and faster to get to each route the more I work, because not every route is gonna like start from the same branching point, but
Hmm.
they might go later, and
Hmm.
then I already have like a day of writing done for that one.
And from the demo, so the demo was very interesting because I was not expecting it to be as long as it was. And you laid it out very clearly actually on the store page that the demo would contain I think it's I want to say 125,000 words. I mean, that's a lot for a demo.
Yeah.
Um I mean, especially
But
when
at this point it's not a demo anymore,
yeah.
I think.
I mean, especially when you compare it to Locked. Locked was like
Yeah.
10 minutes long, right?
Yeah.
And your demo for artificial selection is 10 hours long. So it's a little bit of a difference. Um,
Yeah.
so I do actually want to ask, and it includes an entire route basically, as far as I can tell. It goes down one character's route uh, that I was able to find out, and there were I think it says there are two endings that you could get on the itch.io
Yeah.
page. Um, but yeah, I mean, what was your thought process behind putting such a long demo up for free? Um, I mean, 10 hours is a lot. Most demos don't go more than 10 minutes or 1 hour long. Like, that's usually the range I see. So, what was your thought process behind that?
Yeah, yeah. So the original artificial selection demo was, I think, like 1 to 1.5 hours. And it was like that for, I think, 2 years. And it still brought in new players. And I also enjoyed getting feedback on the demo. But one thing I noticed is that because I only got feedback on that one demo, and that's what everyone was talking about because the full game wasn't out yet, I just almost compulsively kept going back and polishing this same 1 to 1.5 hour period of the game and hardly made any progress actually writing the continuation of that. So I just naturally wanted to include the players in the development, and so now I'm just making the I think at this point it's always like 6 months old part is the demo. So everything I wrote up until 6 months ago is the now publicly available demo, and every month it's gonna have more added to it because I keep adding more to it. So that's how it is. Yeah, so that's like just keeps getting longer. I'm sorry.
That's very generous of you. um, and your overall aim for it, apparently, according to your page, is like probably, I guess you're estimating over 500,000 words. It's probably going to be more than that, but
Yeah, at this point.
but yeah, it's very ambitious, as all of these projects tend to be. That I keep interviewing you guys. Everybody has ambitious projects that they are working on, so it seems to be a recurring theme. But but yeah, it's a lot, and it's you have all these different characters, 14 characters, 14 different routes, and lots of content. And let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about the actual game. The first thing that I noticed immediately when I started up the game was, believe it or not, the game's presentation. It looked very, very highly polished, and the thing that I really liked, actually, like right off the bat, was you had this sort of parallax graphical system where the camera is tied to your mouse position, and
Ah, yeah.
it was just so cool because I mean, I've tried to do something like that in the past for my own game, not tying it to the mouse movement, but just like having sort of a camera movement thing to sort of like give the effect of, I guess for lack of a better word, realism, that the camera sort of moving and sort of showing, how you would actually look at a scene if you were there.
Hmm.
But tying it to the mouse is like that makes perfect sense because it can stay still. It doesn't like give anyone nausea or dizziness, having the camera constantly bobbing up and down. That's what I tried to do. That was a bad idea.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
uh,
Never would have expected a visual novel to give me motion sickness.
yeah, exactly. Uh, so tying it to the mouse is like really smart, and it gives the illusion of three-dimensional depth, even though all of the assets are presumably two-dimensional. I mean, I know the backgrounds are 3D renders, but the game is not
Yeah.
actually in 3D. It's just two-dimensional images stacked onto each other with a parallax sort of filter, and that adds a lot of polish that I just don't see in a lot of games. So it's just a very cinematic experience, just booting it up and getting into the first scene. So
Thank you. I'm glad. But where credit is due, I did not make that parallax system. That is someone else's plugin that I can definitely recommend. So
yeah, well,
I
there you
think it's
go.
available for free for any RenPy user. So yeah.
Well, that makes it really surprising that more people don't do it than actually,
Yeah, it's such an easy way to add depth to your scenes. I guess you just I guess the technical tip I can give is that you have to make your backgrounds bigger than the game's dimension, so there is actually some wiggle room to go around. But yeah, other than that, I see no reason not to do it.
Yeah. Aside from that, though, the whole game really does have a solid presentation. So,
Thank you.
and I think that helps. I think people underestimate how much good presentation can elevate a game from
Yeah,
good to great. So, that's just one of those things. Now, as far as like the actual content of the first scene, it captured my attention because um, you did a really good job with setting up the expectations and then just totally subverting them right afterward. Um, which I'm sure that's what you're going for. I'm sure you're glad to hear that because um, the main character is at a store with his friend, right? And they're buying flowers
yeah,
for a girl. And you're watching this and you're thinking, okay, it's probably for some kind of date that they're going to go on. or something like that, some sort of relationship issue that they're having. And then the next scene, fade to black, and then next scene starts, and they go to a cemetery, right? And you're like, oh no,
Yeah.
that totally hits hard when you understand. Okay, the girl that he's getting the flowers for, she's not around anymore, and they're going to her gravesite to put the flowers there. It's like, oh man, it gets immediate emotional connection to the main character. And the other thing that's really interesting, so right off the bat, you've hooked me with the main character because whether you've gone through some sort of bad breakup or maybe the death of a person that you've loved, right? You
Mhm.
understand how hard that hits. And you've also presented that in a mysterious way because we don't actually know what happened to the girl. We just know that she's dead, right? And
Yeah.
so we're immediately thrown into that situation. Uh, we're both emotionally hit by it, but we're also wondering what happened. And that's a really good hook for people to get into. It's like, okay, now I have to play the rest of the game because I want to know what happened to her, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so that scene got me hooked. So
I'm really happy to hear that because I think the very first draft of that prologue was definitely a lot more boring. So I think it was due to continuous feedback that it managed to be like distilled to that hook, which I'm very happy about.
yeah, a lot of visual novels in general, or maybe a lot of non-visual novel story games. Many of them have issues with the beginning, where the beginning is way too
Yeah.
slow, and you've managed to avoid that. Do you have any like advice for how you sort of came up with that hook?
Honestly, I guess that was always how I wanted to start the game because I did want to show like the normal life outside of the death game for just a bit for the world building to actually be placed somewhere.
Hmm.
But yeah, other than that, I guess just make sure that the characters are likable first. Because I think with a different game I made, I started the game with having three guys just bickering at each other. And I guess that makes for a much more off-putting start than just two friends hanging out. And
Hmm.
then gradually it turns into something more mysterious.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, and actually, in that same scene, uh, we get the first philosophical choice you can make in the game, which I thought was really interesting because I've thought this choice a lot myself, which is you can either blame yourself for the girl's death, or you can blame the universe, right? Do you want to focus internally blaming yourself, or do you want to focus externally on blame society, blame other people? Um, you
Mhm.
know, and I think a lot of people can relate to that, where something goes wrong, and you're like, you know, many types of people might blame themselves when something goes wrong. Other types of people might choose to blame others, right? And I think uh, that's just something we all do all the time when any kind of tragedy strikes. And I actually got really stuck on that choice. I didn't know which one to pick for a long time. And of course, part of that issue was that I didn't really know the context, right? I didn't know, well, was he responsible or was he not? Uh, but we still have to make the choice without any context. And I think it's more about how the player chooses to deal with that
Yeah.
topic in general. Um, and so it's more of a reflection of the player. I don't know if those choices actually make a difference, but whether they do or not, I think it's a good move to put them at the front and just make the player think about it.
Yeah, I guess also again, that was more of a not coincidence, but I didn't put that deep of a thought into it. I just most of all just wanted to show that the main character definitely feels the need to blame someone for
Mm-hmm.
it, or at the very least isn't ready to move on just yet. Like he needs to blame something. And then the second point is that his friend obviously will comfort him and reassure him no matter which option he chooses. And you find also slightly different clues to what happened depending on what you say. But yeah, it doesn't also cause like a branch that to a different route or anything. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that choice actually connects back to the topic of, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not the philosophy major. uh, I think, I think that connects back to the idea of determinism and free will, where
Yeah, a little bit,
yeah,
definitely.
if you know if you have like the ability to make a different decision and maybe things could have turned out differently, or
Yeah,
maybe it just had to happen this way regardless of what you could have done.
yeah. And I guess both are highly depressing in a different way. So,
Yeah, well, yeah, for
yeah.
sure. You can think about it like, well, I could have done something, but I didn't, or
Yeah.
I had no ability to change anything at all. Typically, in that situation, I tend to put the blame on myself in most cases like that because I want to believe that I could have done something differently, or maybe even that I could do something differently next time something happens. I have that kind of a mindset. What would you choose in that situation?
I think instinctively I would definitely also blame myself because yeah, that one is just the knee-jerk reaction. And I guess also, like you said, you can then in a way take it like once you're ready to move on a little bit as a learning experience, because then at least well, I let it happen this one time, but it I won't let it happen again. And I guess that can also give you comfort a little bit. Whereas if it's just the universe, then I guess you can't really do anything ever.
Right? No free will.
Yeah,
Okay, so after that though, after that opening scene, the protagonist does end up trapped in the death game. I also, by the way, I just want to mention, I think it's a cool idea for a device that can manipulate your dreams. I thought that was a really cool thing that you added in there. Um, I wish that was kind of real because I would love to do that. I would totally
same.
buy one. Um,
I think that's why I come up with it. I was like sleep deprived teenager, and I was like, damn, I wish I had this.
But after he goes to sleep, he suddenly wakes up in a different place, and maybe conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat. He's been dreaming the whole game. I don't know. That might be the biggest plot twist of all time, but
Never
you
been
never
done
know.
before.
um, but he wakes up. He wakes up in the death game next to his sin mate, and the girl named Ephra, who she plays a pretty major role in the demo at least.
Yeah,
Um, and so they were paired together, and they have to solve an escape room puzzle to proceed. So there are clear inspirations or influences from Danganronpa and Zero Escape.
yeah,
What else? What else inspired the game, or what were your biggest influences?
yeah. I guess yeah, as you said, Zero Escape and Danganronpa were definitely the biggest ones, but also, like I mentioned, I do think somehow Hunger Games really stayed with me, especially in terms of like uh dystopian societies and how they shape politics and how people value human life and stuff like that. So that really was a big one, I think. And yeah, other than that, um yeah, I think also just a really niche, uh, not Persona game, but similar. That's called Devil Survivor. There were also three different routes depending on various philosophical concepts, and I also really like that. So yeah, just the general uh, overpowering political dreads is kind of in there, even though once you actually start playing the game, it I guess doesn't feel that overpowering because politics is just integrated to certain comments people make, but it's not like out there a big theme really. But yeah.
So on the topic of the escape rooms, actually, this is an interesting question too. The way that you designed the escape rooms visually is it's sort of like a little diorama of the room, and that's a very different way of visualizing it compared to a game like Zero Escape, where you sort of point and click around like a first person perspective. Uh,
Yeah,
in your game, it's like a top down thing with little pixelated characters placed in the room. And what was your inspiration to make it like that?
I think that one's just a skill issue. Like I'm not able to draw detailed 3D environments, so but I mean I am capable enough with pixel art. So in the very first version of the game, I just did it all in I think black and white pixel art, so it was only white silhouettes on top of a black backgrounds, and then I kind of upgraded it to a new uh, software that lets me do
Mm-hmm.
voxels, which is 3D pixels, and then it
Mm-hmm.
actually exports the 3D background as an isometric pixel graphic. So then that's what I work with. But yeah, I guess it's really mostly just technical limitations, and I can't say it's a grand artistic vision for that one.
That's really interesting because I think it works out really well, and I think both part of it's like you want to lean into your strengths and stay away from your weaknesses, and I think
Yeah,
that does a good job of that. But it also just adds something unique to the game that you don't see anywhere else, and it's like, huh, that's interesting. It sticks in your mind when you see that.
I'm really glad.
And it also lets you do things that you can't normally do in an escape room, like you can rotate objects around, and
Yeah,
like you can't always do that, right? If you did it a different way.
yeah, I guess the minimalism gives me more freedom with other things because then I can just easily create a slight variation of the same thing.
Yeah, that's true too. Okay, so then after that, after you solve the escape room puzzle, then you eventually meet up with all the rest of the characters. And I think you did a really good job of creating a truly diverse set of characters, not just in appearance, but also in personality. And, part of the game, it is sort of a romance game, so you get to show affection to the different characters and build relationships with them. 7 boys, 7 girls, equally romanceable. So if you were trapped in the game yourself, which character would you choose to pursue?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think probably like the low hanging fruit would be Forrest because she's just like very outgoing and almost like overtly flirty.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess since you don't exactly wake up in a death game-esque thing and immediately are like, oh, nice singles in my area. So if I had to choose one, probably her, yeah. But later on, everyone. So
Okay. Um, which character did you find was the most fun to write?
I probably think Divin and Tis, which is probably not expected, since especially in the beginning of the game, they're pretty quiet and also pretty boring. So it's kind of a slow burn that I kind of really started understanding them as characters, and then it just clicked, and it's very easy to write them. But Loy is also fun because he just picks fights with everyone, and Absent too, because then I can just turn off my brain and just say some random stuff and make him say that.
Well, it's good that you have so much fun writing all the characters.
Yeah, it's like basically every time it's just a new mindset to get into. It's really fun.
Yeah. I mean, you can kind of actually tell. I mean, the dialogue is very, unique for each character. You're doing a lot of things, by the way. You wrote the story, you programmed the code, and you did the artwork. So,
Yeah.
it's a lot of different things. Which one of those do you identify with the most? Are you a writer or a programmer, or because you're sort of doing everything, but which one do you sort of like the most?
That's funny because I think I really do not like writing. It's like torture sometimes, but always whenever I'm done and actually have a really good scene in front of me, then I'm extremely proud and extremely happy. So I guess in terms of identifying with the work, it's probably the writing. But when it comes to what's like easiest for me, then it's probably the art because there you can just I at this point just practiced a lot and it got even easier over time. And by now I think the style has settled into its own thing. And I also really like drawing because you can do other things at the same time. You can
Hmm.
watch a video. I I tried listening to music while writing and it literally never ends well. So for programming, I also enjoy it, definitely. Especially fun for the escape rooms, just setting up each mini game and puzzle and stuff like that. But it plays a way more minor role compared to the other two, I think.
Okay, so let's talk about spin-off games. And there's actually two that I want to talk about. Obviously, there's Artificial Fashionista, but the other one that I was very surprised to find out about was there's this bonus mini game in the demo, and honestly, I didn't know what to expect from it. It's like a management sim kind of game where you manage the characters running around and grabbing things from the I don't know what they do. They grab things from the different rooms and bring them to you. And uh, I actually thought this was really fun. I played it for a whole hour and I beat it. Uh, Although, funnily enough, I almost beat it in one go, but I was missing one item by the very end, and I had to restart the last phase over. Uh, but I honestly think that could be a very fun game on its own. I don't know if you've considered that or if you have plans to expand that, but that could just be a fun game in its own right. I just have to say that because I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you. I think that game is such a tremendous hit or miss because people either think it's way too hard and too boring and too frustrating, or they really enjoy it. So I'm glad you fell into the latter.
Yeah, well, it probably fits a certain group of people, right? The
Right.
more, I guess, puzzle game people, right, who like strategy games and min-maxing optimization stuff, right? Because there's a lot of that where, I mean, it's a management game, so
But yeah, to answer your question, I did think about like making it a standalone thing, but I feel like in order to justify making it a standalone thing, I would still have to invest a lot more into it. And then I was like, okay, no, stop. Skill creep is hitting too hard there, so focus on your main game right now and worry about that later. But I definitely felt the temptation for that.
yeah. I mean, I'm just looking at it like you've got a solid hour of gameplay with what you have there already. If you flesh it out to go the whole 9 yards with all the characters and all the different locations, I bet I could easily be like 10
Yeah,
hours of gameplay or more if you make it really replayable.
that's true. Yeah, definitely putting that on my to-do list.
Why did you actually make the game in the first place? What was the reasoning behind that?
That was because I think um I was just really addicted to Cookie Clicker and other similar games at the time. And then I just felt compelled to make my own version of a management clicker type thingy. So it really was just self-indulgence there.
It's an interesting strategy too to just put a completely unrelated mini game in the bonus section that most people probably don't even click. Because I almost didn't click it. I didn't know there was even anything there.
Right.
But yeah. And then you've got your other spin-off game, Artificial Fashionista. So what was the inspiration for that one?
Uh, Unsurprisingly, I was really addicted to mobile fashion games for a while,
Hmm.
and then wanted to make my own fashion game. You can see a theme there, maybe. And yeah, for that one, I actually had like a feasible game plan for NaNoRenO. So in 1 month, I would be able to finish a full spin-off game. So that's I planned that like a month in advance and made sure I would actually be able to do it in that time span. And yeah, then it actually worked out. And also, I took it as an exercise in really um, optimizing the RenPy screen code because I really learned a lot with that menu gameplay type thing. And yeah, so even for artificial selection itself, I took away some lessons there.
So it sounds like you had the idea for a fashion game first, and maybe it was just a coincidence that you had a character that fit neatly into that, or
Yes, that was a very lucky coincidence. Otherwise, it would have been a lot more random, I think.
yeah, and you've been actually that game is also free, so you're very generous with your games, right? You give a lot of content away for free. Um, but you are selling packs of DLC with different outfits every once in a while, which I think most fashion games or dress up games typically do, right? That's pretty normal.
Yeah.
So how's that been going so far?
Ah, like in terms of marketing and financials, completely terribly.
Oh, okay.
It's
Really?
been not like in terms of investment, probably not worth it whatsoever. But I still enjoyed making the game, and I think I'm gonna still bring out the remaining winter and spring collections because I just really enjoy coming up with new outfits for her. But
hmm hmm
yeah, it's I think very hard to especially market a spin-off when the main game isn't well known either,
hmm
since then many people also think, oh, so I first have to play the other thing in order to understand this one. So it's not really a marketing tool, but rather it makes it way harder for the spin-off to succeed. At least that was my takeaway.
Interesting.
Also, that fashion games, I think, are very hard to sell on PC. It's way more of a mobile game thing. So
That makes sense.
maybe that's also why it didn't work that well.
Yeah, my thought process has been that maybe I considered the idea of doing spin-offs for my own games, like taking characters and making spin-off games. I did one of those years ago, actually.
Mm.
But the idea has crossed my mind a lot to sort of diversify with that and like make one character a game all about them, another character all about them, and maybe you can sort of, gain an audience through like, so maybe some people would play your dress-up game and then play the murder mystery death game. I mean, I don't know, right? Is there an overlapping audience there?
It has been reported, but yeah, not the majority, I think.
It did make me actually consider when I played your game. I did wonder, like, is there a way to actually blend a fashion game with a mystery game? I don't know. That might be something to think about if you could sort of like merge those together into one concept. But
That would be really fun. Yeah. If there is a way, I will figure it out. So
next project, though, maybe finish this one first. uh,
yeah.
oh, also on the topic of fashion, and sort of pivoting to like the business side of things. Uh, have you considered? I know that you make merchandise like keychains and pins. Have you considered making merchandise like shirts or whatever, like other fashion, like actual fashion accessories? Or
Yes. I cannot tell you how many hours I spent researching that, and to little success, unfortunately. Because I do think if I do want to do it, I want to go all in and not just like print a character's face on a t-shirt in some drop shipping type thing, but rather just have like a character's shirt recreated and make it wearable. So that would require a custom tailoring and not just a printing service. And it turns out that is extremely expensive and also requires usually a high minimum quantity for them to even consider you. So that is why that currently hasn't been happening because I don't think I have 1,000 buyers for a t-shirt yet. So
yet?
that's still gonna wait a little bit, but I am very interested in that.
No, I was thinking about that and I thought, well, that the game over shirt, and the binary code
Yeah,
shirt, I think those would be pretty good ones. That might be easy to do.
yeah, the binary hoodie, that is the one I actually considered manufacturing.
So you've also told me that you're passionate about the environment. So how is that factored into your merchandise production?
Yeah, actually, that was one of the main things I considered when choosing which manufacturer to work with, because I'm based in Europe. Then I also chose a European manufacturer, even though it's uh, probably a bit more expensive than other alternatives.
hmm
And so it's both the shipping aspect of it, but also that specific manufacturer called Zap Creatives. Definitely recommend them. Also makes keychains out of recycled acrylic. So rather than creating even more plastic waste, it's actually just reusing them, which I found really neat. And they were the only ones that I saw that actually did that, which is cool.
Last but not least, I want to mention this because this also kind of blew my mind when I found out about this. I know that you have a monthly membership program on Ko-fi, which is really interesting because not only does it unlock like certain membership benefits like on the website or whatever, but it also integrates into the game itself, which I didn't realize. You have like a point system where every month members get a point that they can spend on digital things in the game. And
Yeah.
that is just a really cool idea that I've honestly never thought of before. Um, so can you explain sort of like how you came up with that?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with the bonus shop in the game itself. I guess I just love unlockables, and so I just came up with a little assortment of different click to continue icons that you can unlock, and you basically earn points for each ending you reach, and if you complete a route, you get even more points. And other than that, because I had so many shop items and only like 4 points that were officially obtainable up until that point, I was like, okay, might as well just give the monthly supporters some extra points so they can get more stuff for now. And that's how I came up with that. Because to me, it doesn't cost me anything extra, but it's just a fun little thing to do.
It really makes me wonder like, okay, what else how could you expand that into more than just like a click to continue icon? I think there's a lot of potential for a lot of things and all kinds of games.
Definitely. Yeah, I've also been thinking about what else to add, but for now, I've been too busy with the updates to come up with bonus stuff, unfortunately.
So, we've had a very fun and interesting conversation, I think. So we're going to start to wrap things up. But on the topic of making mystery games, I do want to ask because you have experience making a really small game that you were able to make very quickly, and you also have experience making a really big game that's taken a while to do. So, how would you advise developers to handle scope creep on a project? What do you think they can do?
I think you really have to like think about scope creep right from the beginning, because once you already start working on it and invest resources, it's too late, because then you feel like you already invested, so now you don't want to lose that, so you just keep going. So, definitely speaking from experience here, think about your scope and what is feasible in what amount of time really early on, and then once you're done with that, then you can think about adding more. But yeah, it's even now that I really learned that lesson, it's still hard to take it to heart.
Yeah, for whatever reason, we all seem to have that problem. I think we're all very ambitious people with big ideas, and mystery games are
Yeah.
complicated things. So I'm
Yep.
not really surprised that uh, happens as much as it does.
Yeah.
Also, what advice would you give to someone who wants to make a mystery game but has zero experience?
I guess it's write an outline.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because I know that sounds really obvious, but to me, I just kind of just started writing in an engine and just came up with random dialogues and didn't really know where I was going. So at the very least, write down where the hell you are going, so you don't have to fix your mess later on. But other than that, I think learning by doing is really the best way to go. And it worked for me, and I hope it will also work for you.
Well said. I totally agree about the outline. Been there, done that. Uh, you, it's like a map. You don't want to get lost without a map, right? So
Yeah.
finally, I do want to make sure and ask this question because you've also been a very strong supporter of Mystery Gamedev from day one, and it's been really awesome to have you in the community from the very beginning. So, thank you for all of the support that you've helped us with so far. And
Thank you as well.
yeah, I mean, it's awesome to have so many people in the community and developers of really fantastic games involved. And so I want to make sure that you have the chance to answer this question, which is what has been the best part for you about joining the Mystery Game Dev community, and how would you like to see it evolve going forward?
I think for me, the favorite part is definitely the monthly calls, even though I sadly can't always make them. Every time I did make it, it was an extremely interesting conversation, and even just like lurking and listening in was really fun. And also sometimes I'm almost kind of uh, fan fanboying like about some of the people there. So that's also really cool that I got to know the creators of games I really loved on a more casual level, which is really cool. And what I hope is that the community, of course, keeps growing and that even more people find it, both developers and players. And yeah, I really wish it all the best.
Well, so you heard it here first. If you're a developer, be sure to join the voice chats because a lot of fun stuff happens in the voice chats, and we'd love to
Definitely.
hear from some new people, right? Now, it's been a very fun conversation, and I've enjoyed talking with you about your game. I enjoyed playing your game too,
Thank you.
and I'm looking forward to the rest of it. So, on that note, actually, where can listeners go to follow you and get updates on the game and find out about your other projects?
I guess the easiest place would be my website, KigyoDev.com, where you will also find the link to my Discord server, which is probably the most active community place at the moment. But yeah, I'm also on Twitter and wait, no longer Twitter. You know the name. But yeah, I'm only on Twitter otherwise, I think, in terms of social media. And on the website, you'll also find the links to my Steam page and everything else. So yeah.
Thank you for taking the time out of your day to do this conversation. It's been a lot of fun, and I think it's been very insightful for everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been really fun for me too. And thank you so much for hosting this and being such a fun host as well.
That concludes today's Mystery Gamedev Podcast episode. To join our community of fans and developers of mystery-themed video games, go to mysterygamedev.com and subscribe to our newsletter for weekly updates and more podcast episodes. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.